Hi, Meg. Thank you so much for having us on. We really appreciate being included in the conversations happening today. We were able to join in as the last one was ending, and it sounds like some really important topics are being discussed. And so to be included in such an important program means a lot. Thank you for having us.
So happy to have you. Kadja, do you have anything else you'd like to add? And please tell me if I'm butchering your name. I hope I have the pronunciation correct.
You said the name right, and Christian nailed it. I'm just happy to be here. It's my first panel I've ever done.
Yay, we're so happy to have you. Okay, so let's talk about your relation to the LGBTQ community. Are you allies? Are you members? Do you prefer not to disclose? What would you say each of you represents? Christian, would you like to go first?
Sure, I am a member of the LGBTQ community, both professionally and personally. I've had the great honor of doing organizing work in the LGBTQ community for over a decade now. And I do identify as gay. I came out at a young age and started my organizing work right away. And it's really been a journey since then in advocating for equality and justice for all LGBTQ people. I'm centered in this work for a few reasons. One is knowing that there is essentially an entire generation of gay men missing, having lost their lives to HIV and AIDS. And so I feel that it is the responsibility of all young LGBTQ people to stand up and advocate for equality against the injustices that we are facing as a community. It's why one of the issues that we're working on this year at Garden State Equality is decriminalizing HIV and AIDS in New Jersey, which is really important work. The other reason I'm centered in this work is being a young LGBTQ person in America and the United States was challenging. And I was given opportunities to be able to lead in this community that I wanted to take advantage of to ensure that previous or future generations would have it easier than I had it. We've made a lot of progress in the last decade and a half. We've seen progress thanks to the Obama administration. We've seen, some setbacks over the last 4 years, but now we're seeing that progress again with the Biden administration officially recognizing LGBTQ Pride Month. That's at the political level, and then in the media, we've just seen a transformation in companies, and in the workplace, we've seen a transformation. But there's still so much more work to do. I mean, youth alone, if we want to talk about the obstacles that LGBTQ youth face, they represent 40% of the entire youth homeless population. They experience some of the highest rates of bullying in schools. They are more than likely to attempt suicide at least once in their lives. And so all these obstacles are what we still face today. It's why this work is so important. It's why it's important for companies to be involved in ensuring that we create a more equal and just country, a more equal and just world, because it's really about ensuring that when young people come out of the closet, that they can exist in a safe, affirming, equal, just society. When you start at that point, then you increase your likelihood of having a positive experience for the rest of your life. When you have to face those obstacles as a young LGBTQ person, we often call that work adverse childhood experiences, where there's a lot of trauma attached to those experiences. And unfortunately, that does have an impact as you grow older. So I do center myself in doing this work for the next generation.
That's so amazing. And you're right, there's a lot of work that's on the next generation because of the loss of an entire generation. I'm 35, I've never lived in a world without knowledge of AIDS. But we just passed, it was either yesterday or the day before, it was the 40-year anniversary of the first mentions of this disease being spread in public record. And it's just wild to me that it was so, how much havoc it really wreaked on this entire community. Kadja, what about you? What really brings you to to this discussion and to this struggle that we're hopefully all working towards making better?
Well, thanks for having me. I'll start from the beginning, from the initial question. So I'm a LGBTQ community member, both professionally and non-professionally as well. Prior to joining Garden State Equality, my form of advocacy was more so just telling LGBTQ stories, more focused on visibility and spreading the word and the awareness that, hey, we're here and we're doing great things. So whether it was covering a story about the Asbury Park nonprofit that was feeding people during the COVID-19 pandemic, or talking about an artist in Cape May, that was my form of advocacy. Now I'm more hands-on, boots on the ground, since I'm the community organizer for Garden State Equality. And it's rewarding. I love it. To also answer your initial question, I identify as a gay male as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about corporate responsibility. Now, you both are part of the Garden State Equality group or project. Can we talk a little bit about how you work with, what your opinion is on corporate responsibility, and also how the organization really partners with corporations to promote that change?
Absolutely. Garden State Equality has been around for over 15 years fighting for equality in the state. We've made a ton of progress with equality in the law. As I was mentioning earlier, there's still work to do, but LGBTQ people don't just live their lives outside of work, they live their lives within work. And so it's so important that workplaces are a safe environment for them to be out and open. We also know through studies that LGBTQ people perform better when they're able to be their true authentic selves in the workplace. We are framing this because we are Garden State Equality as what the work that we do here in New Jersey, but we are a member of the Equality Federation. And so there are state LGBTQ organizations in nearly all 50 states doing this work with companies that are headquartered in that space. We've been really lucky to have some companies out on the forefront for this work, from Novartis to Bristol Myers Squibb to PSE&G. For the ones that are watching that I'm not going to mention, charge it to my head and not my heart. But we are very fortunate to have a lot of pro-equality companies here headquartered in New Jersey that have a national and global presence. And so the work in those spaces is really an extension of the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index, where they rate companies based on their LGBTQ policies and environments in the workspace. We're really fortunate to be able to lean on the support of the Human Rights Campaign to encourage companies to improve their score in the index. A lot of LGBTQ people do check the score that is provided by the Human Rights Campaign before applying for a job at a place. If you're an engineer and the company that you're going to be working for has a score below 50, then you might have some concerns being out and open in that workplace. Some of those concerns are just the comfortability aspect of having a picture of your spouse on your desk, or being able to talk freely in the lunchroom or the break room with your employees, but also from a promotion standpoint and what your safety will be in that role in the years ahead. We know that LGBTQ people have been passed up for promotions. We know we still hear instances all the time where LGBTQ people are fired wrongly. And some of those individuals do successfully win lawsuits against companies that fire their employees, because it is illegal here in New Jersey to be fired on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. In nearly 30 states in our country, it is still legal to fire someone based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And so
I live in one of those states. I can absolutely tell you it's true, and it's horrible.
Horrible. And so what we are trying to do here, Meg, in New Jersey, is to ensure that the companies that may have a presence in your state have policies and a workplace culture that is accepting of the LGBTQ community. And that's one of the ways that we can work here at the local level and have a national impact.
Now, can you speak a little bit to what the nonprofit organizations benefit, like how they benefit from this partnership? Because it seems like y'all are doing the majority of the work and then not really getting the credit, because like you said, these corporations are the ones that get to say, oh yeah, we have a score such as this. So what do nonprofit orgs really get from that partnership?
I'll jump in real quick, Christian. I would say we know the work's getting done. And that's priceless. in collaboration with our community partners, we've passed over 225 pro-equality laws, from the Transgender Equality Task Force to our LGBTQ curriculum. We couldn't have done that without our private sponsors. And like Christian said, I'm gonna shout out PSE&G real quick. And yeah, that study alone was privately funded from our sponsors, and we wouldn't have been able to come up with that all-inclusive curriculum. And now we have the most comprehensive curriculum in the nation when it comes to LGBTQ studies in schools.
That's amazing. I know you've talked a little bit about the different functions that the organization does. Can you talk a little bit, is there anything that we've left out of that, or anything that's like really core to your mission that our audience should know about?
Well, Meg, I want to talk a little bit about corporate responsibility and what you mentioned earlier, because we do believe that companies should be involved in the progress for equality well beyond the buildings that they occupy. We saw all across our country companies actively involved in the campaign for marriage equality, companies threatening to pull out their business from states that were not allowing marriage equality to happen. What we saw after marriage equality was a lot of people and companies say that the job was done and they went home. We even saw state equality organizations like Garden State Equality shutter their doors, but we knew better here in New Jersey that there was still work to do. And so as we see anti-trans bills popping up all across the country that are trying to prevent trans girls from participating in girls' sports, we are looking to companies again to be able to flex that financial muscle and say, we're not going to be doing business in your state if you're going to discriminate against transgender youth. And so that's a way that we can lean on these organizations, and that's the responsibility that they need to hold in order to be good companies, right? So I think it's wonderful that policies are passed internally that make the life of LGBTQ employees better, but there is that role that you need to be actively involved in the outside world. When we saw the murder of George Floyd, this last company, we saw a lot of companies step up and ensure that they were listening to their Black and Brown employees. They were being actively involved in what the state government was doing to challenge racism at every level of government. And that's a role that it's important that companies play in our country. And it's important that they are lifting up the voices of community activists too, and not just having executives speak out, because this is a partnership between nonprofit organizations and companies. And we can work together to not only improve the environment internally at the company, but we can work together to improve our nation as a whole.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you're right. The idea of companies actively pushing back and fighting, if they're fighting and saying like, we won't want to do business here because you have these rules. I mean, I remember when the trans bathroom bill was horribly passed. I think it was in North Carolina. And that was like the first big wave was all of these artists saying, well, we're not going to play there anymore. And it strongly reminded me of Ray Charles and the fight that he had in Georgia and didn't play on a stage in Georgia for how many years because they wouldn't allow desegregation of the concert venues. So you're right. It's absolutely one of those things that there need to be bigger voices involved if the smaller voices, no matter how many, are not being listened to. So that's absolutely wonderful. Kadja, let's talk to you a little bit about your Trenton City Council speech. You had a lot of involvement with the youth of Trenton, and you focused on that in your speeches. And much like the Pride Network does, you believe in this concept of transformative leadership. Can you tell us a little bit about what that concept is and why it's important when it comes to young people?
Sure, Meg. So in my campaign speech on my website, I was more or less speaking to why Trenton, more specifically, the West Ward needs new leadership. And when I said, we need new leadership, a leadership that exudes energy, dedication, and brings a new vision. And I meant it. And it's not to knock those that came before me. It actually does the contrary. I think we all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And certain tactics and methods may have worked for a certain time. And while an older way of doing things got us to this point, I think it's important for organizations to adjust fire. We say adjust fire in the U.S. Army. We say adjust fire. So adjust fire and to change your organizational strategy and come to the board and say, okay, we may have to adjust this, and change is good.
No, I think that's so incredibly important. You're right. It's that idea of, okay, well, this isn't working. Let's try something else and see what kind of results we can get with that. Now, is your focus on young people similar to what Christian was saying earlier about, how people in the community these days have an obligation and a right and a purpose, to really keep the progress moving forward, since we can't rely on that previous generation? Would you say that that's kind of core to your focus on young people, or is there a different reason you tend to focus your efforts there?
I would say yes. I do agree with Christian. I still consider myself young, but Christian and I think we have a few decades left in us, but we can't do this work forever. So it's important to train up and mentor up the next generation of LGBTQ leaders. Those who came before us did it for us, and right before them, we spoke about the generation that was lost. But that's why I focused a lot on the youth, to prepare them for the long road ahead. It reminds me of a proclamation reading I attended this week. There's a part where in one of my speeches, I talk about the importance of a proclamation, and how what it is it's an acknowledgement of, the past and the discriminatory practices. And it also gives us hope for the long road ahead. And that's why I reach back and focus on youth a lot.
I love that. Before we keep going in our conversation, I just want to reiterate to our audience listening in right now, if you have a question for Kadja or Christian, please feel free to put it into the chat that's on the right-hand side of your screen. I would love to bring your questions to them, so that way you all can learn as much as possible during this session today. All right, so let's talk a little bit about kind of where the youth stand in this new post-pandemic world. I remember reading pretty soon after the start of the pandemic last year about various organizations, specifically within New York City, that were working with homeless youth, and how, especially for LGBTQ individuals, like Christian was saying, the problems that they face are generally a lot larger than seen by most, and they're much more pervasive and much more likely. And so it's one of those things where you don't want kids sleeping out on the street, but in a pandemic world, how can you have the rotating groups that you see in group homes or in shelters? So let's talk a little bit about what a safe environment looks like for youth, especially post-pandemic, because I think that's something that could be not necessarily hard to understand, but maybe hard to execute, I guess.
All right, we're a year and a half in the virtual space, and I still haven't mastered the body language of who's going to speak first.
None of us have. I think I'll do a better job of calling on someone, but you're right. It's definitely a game of, make sure it's not a lag time and it's an actual pause. So yeah, Christian, take us away here. So
I do have a thunderstorm happening right outside right now. So if I do cut out for whatever reason, it's because we've lost power here, but I will join via the phone if that happens, just so you know. New Jersey, we're positioned in between Philadelphia and New York City, two of the largest cities in the United States. And we have a unique homeless youth problem here, because many times LGBTQ youth will travel from across the country to these large cities in order to find refuge, in order to find people that look like them. I think that we're making some good progress across our nation, where LGBTQ youth are growing up in safer homes, that they are able to find community in their local areas. But we still know that 40% of the entire youth homeless population are LGBTQ individuals. And so being between Philadelphia and New York City, two very, very LGBTQ friendly cities, a lot of times youth will move there and then not be able to find a safe space, not be able to find housing. And they, cross the river for maybe a slower pace of life here in New Jersey. And so we only And despite that, we only have one LGBTQ youth center in the state of New Jersey that has about 18 beds. And so when you're looking at a population size of a population like homelessness that is that large, there really needs to be more services that are directly geared towards that population. As I was talking about earlier, I was talking about ACEs. Well, one adverse childhood experience is homelessness and having to experience that. And so what we want to do at that young age is intervene and ensure that these young people have positive role models that they can look up, that they have resources that are readily available to them. And there's a great organization here in New Jersey called the RAIN Foundation that specifically works with LGBTQ youth and helps them get on the right path, helps them find employment. But for the purposes of today's conversation, I really want to dig into employment opportunities for the LGBTQ community. I keep on mentioning these statistics of, I don't know if you can hear, it's like a storm rolling through right now.
I've got a vacuum going 3 floors above me, so you're totally fine.
So there, as I said, I mentioned a few statistics today about how the high rates of disparities that LGBTQ people face. And the same goes for employment. Specifically, transgender women of color represent some of the highest rates of unemployment out of any other population. And mind you, out of New Jersey, there was hate crime statistics that show that LGBTQ people are one of the top 3 targeted groups of people for hate crimes in New Jersey. I'm sure that is likely in other states as well. And that's why it's so important for companies to not only be a safe place for people to come and be their true authentic selves, but it's important for companies to do recruitment from the LGBTQ community and job and workforce training. We cannot expect all LGBTQ people to be able to go to college and get the certifications that are needed for the roles. And yet we know progressive companies want to have a diverse workforce. They want to have an employee group that is representative of the communities that they exist in. And so really what that means is companies need to begin to step up. They need to be able to invest in workforce training to untrained communities if they expect them to finally fill those job positions. Showing up at a job fair with a fancy tablecloth and some literature is not going to get you the population that you are trying to reach. And so workforce training is really about that corporate responsibility role, is stepping into the role of education and ensuring that the population that surrounds the space that those companies exist in have a group of people that are trained and skilled to do the work properly.
Yeah, it sounds actually really familiar. I know, obviously, Power to Fly, we work with a lot of companies around the world and especially around the country. And I remember last year we were having an issue, or sorry, 2 years ago, we were having an issue with companies that wanted to see either more Black women come out to their events or more Hispanic women. And one of the things that we talked with them about was the places that they're holding these events. Everybody wants to show off like their great headquarters or the best side of their company or what is their best, most recently renovated space. And that makes a lot of sense. They want to put their best foot forward, but they're not thinking about the fact that some people that they, part of that demographic that they want to attract might not have a car to take them exactly where they need to go. So are you anywhere close to public transportation? Is there, an active Lyft or Uber presence in that area? It's one of those kind of additional things that's not really hard to wrap your mind around, but it's really difficult if you're not thinking about it. And so, yeah, you're right. Putting yourself in the shoes of the people that you are trying to serve makes a lot more sense. Because if you're at that job fair with the best presentation and the greatest employees and everything's great, who's not able to come to that job fair? Are you really reaching out and coming where the people you want to connect with are? Or are you, sort of going halfway or maybe a little bit less and then expecting them to make up the difference? Kadja, do you have anything that you'd like to add to this? Because I want to keep going and exploring the subject further.
Yeah, you actually brought up one of our great corporate sponsors, Lyft. We have a partnership with Lyft for many different programs. One of them is our vaccine access program to help maximize the getting the LGBTQ community vaccinated. We have a partnership where we will pay for their transportation to and from the vaccine site. We have a partnership with them. For instance, if we get an email from an LGBTQ youth who's experiencing homelessness or is also in a violent situation, we have a partnership with Lyft that will pay for them to get anywhere in the state to that safe place, which is the RAIN Foundation, the only youth LGBTQ shelter in New Jersey. So we're really fortunate for that partnership. And yeah, we also have a partnership with Lyft where if you're out at a Pride event and you don't feel safe walking home because the area you live in, you know, may be a little sketchy, we also provide transportation to and from the event for our community members. So I'm glad you touched on Lyft. They're one of our great sponsors we have. And that's a prime example of a corporate sponsor stepping up to do, you know, more than what they have to.
No, absolutely. You're right. That's it's a really great example. I remember there were a lot of conversations around the election time about people providing free, or companies, I should say, providing free transportation to and from polling places. So it's really, really heartening to hear that idea not only, you know, kind of is catching on, but is also being expanded to other programs. Now, obviously, y'all's specialty is mostly in like the New York, New Jersey area. But for those of us not living in like a major city or a major transportation hub, what kind of things can we do to support those organizations around us that might be doing similar work to what you all are doing? Is there certain ways to seek them out or ways people, you know, usually come to you?
Yeah, absolutely. The work that we are doing here is really a model for the rest of the nation. We work very closely with other state organizations all throughout the country on duplicating the work that we're doing here and bringing it to the local area. And so for folks that are watching outside of this region, they should definitely visit the Equality Walk website, Equality Federation website, where they can look up their local state organizations. I mentioned Equality Walk because that's our annual event that's taking place this weekend. There are annual events from all state organizations, whether it's their gala or a walk or a 5K, a Pride event. Being actively engaged in those is an important step forward. As we're in the middle of Pride Month, we're seeing a lot of companies changing their logo to a rainbow version and showing their support for the community. And being LGBTQ is often an invisible identity. And so that's why that visibility is so important. That's why we raise the Pride flag. That's why we change our profile pictures on social media to be rainbow. But it's really important that there's work behind that visibility. Otherwise, it's inauthentic. And so the visibility piece is an important step. And then just making sure that the companies that are showing a Pride flag are not donating to anti-LGBTQ legislators, right? We know that this year, AT&T donated almost $250,000 to anti-LGBTQ legislators. We know that Budweiser donated $35,000 to anti-LGBTQ legislators. Coca-Cola, GM, NBC, all these companies that have changed their social media handles to rainbows have also spent the last year supporting the legislators that are actively working to ban trans youth from participating in girls' sports. And so it's important that companies are authentic when showing their support, especially during Pride Month. But the other thing I just want to add to that is Pride is a wonderful time to celebrate the LGBTQ community. But just like with any other month that represents and honors a group of people, those people exist all throughout the year. So I love the rainbows, but there are lots of opportunities to be supportive. Your LGBTQ employees are coming out, or coming to work every day of the year as out people. And so it's important that there's programming for them to participate in. It's important that they feel supportive through the whole year. And that really applies to all 50 states or wherever folks are tuning in from. So get out, be present at the Pride celebrations, be present at the LGBTQ History Month events, but make sure that at the same time, you know, you're not donating to anti-LGBTQ causes. This isn't one of those situations where there's good people on both sides. If you're supporting people who are actively discriminating against a group of people, then you need to not be standing with them too. There are ways that you can be politically engaged but not support people that are actively supporting the employee group that you're trying to support.
I think that's a really good item to flag. We do have one question that came in from the chat, but before we take that, I want to talk a little bit what you're talking about the rainbow washing. I have my own opinion on this, but as an ally and not a member of the community, I would be really interested to hear what your opinion is. Obviously not representative of the entire group, but your personal opinions. Do you become kind of heartened seeing some of the rainbow washing because it brings an opportunity to kind of take companies that maybe are not walking the walk to task? Or would you prefer to see it not be quite so pervasive? I know that a lot of the rainbow washing happens because of the kind of commercialization of pride, but I'm just interested to see what each of you think.
For me, I love seeing it. Like Christian touched on visibility. I love seeing it, and then I read the comments, and then I'm like, okay, wait a minute. But I really do love seeing it, seeing companies like NFL, but it would be nice to see them practice it as well. If an athlete came out to not be blackballed or to actually make it on a team. And so then you have that whole bit. But I think it's the first minute baby step. It's the first baby step. And now it's, we heard the bark, and now I want to see the bite.
I love that. Christian, what do you think?
Again, the LGBTQ identity is often an invisible identity. And so visibly showing your support for LGBTQ people is an important part of being a good ally. But that is the front door, or maybe a step in. And then it's the real hard work of changing culture, changing laws, advocating for LGBTQ people. As I mentioned, not supporting anti-LGBTQ elected officials. There's also a big difference between a company changing their items to be rainbow and not supporting LGBTQ orgs through that, and then companies like Target, which do a great job of bringing LGBTQ products into their store, and then I think nearly all of the proceeds benefiting GLSEN. GLSEN is the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. There are a lot of companies that are putting pride displays in their stores and selling pride and rainbow products, and then LGBTQ organizations are not benefiting from that. We don't do that. We don't need that. It doesn't do any good. All it is capitalizing on LGBTQ people and their allies. If you think you're being a great company by selling rainbow flags at your store, I'd rather buy them from an LGBTQ owned business locally. It's just not necessary. It's not a product you carry throughout the year. So, why bring it into your store just for June? So I think it's important, and it is hard to do, is to be a smart consumer around this time of year and ensure that you're just not buying something that's a rainbow from a company that doesn't support the community. In fact, I mentioned some companies earlier, and they sell products that are rainbow. They don't donate those proceeds to LGBTQ organizations, and they're actively donating it against LGBTQ causes. So sometimes it's trickier to figure out, and it's not as black and white as not eating at Chick-fil-A. But again, I wouldn't want to start Pride Month without anybody showing support. I think the visibility piece is important, but there's a lot of hard work that has to go with that as well.
No, I absolutely. So as you're talking about, companies that really kind of are doing a good job of this, it really kind of throws me back to Absolute Vodka and how 30 years ago, Absolute Vodka was the only large, corporation that stood behind Pride, that openly said, hey, this is something that we're supporting. They put out a rainbow product, and that was their big draw. And it really led, granted, it took a couple of years to kick in, but it led this huge wave of companies seeing, they see the rainbow connection, and all of a sudden they see dollar signs. And that is true, but you're right. It's very important to be a smart consumer when it comes to these things. It's really easy to be dazzled by the rainbow and, oh my God, I can't wait to wear that to Pride, or this is going to be so fun this year. But yeah, it's much harder to really try and do that work. I mean, even when the product isn't quite as tempting as Chick-fil-A, it's still hard. So yeah, it's definitely something to really educate yourself on, and kind of try to do the best you can. All right, so go ahead, Christian, sorry.
I just want to add to your point there, which was Absolute is a great example of a company that very early on showed visibility for the community. And this is really the evolution of corporate LGBTQ pride. Those were the early days when you could change your bottle to rainbow and everyone wanted to buy your vodka bottle. But now in 2021, if you just have a rainbow vodka bottle and you're not doing anything to support the community, then the community is going to stop drinking you. And if you look very closely at LGBTQ events, and at least from bars in our area, Absolute is not the first vodka choice anymore. It's often Tito's handmade vodka. And that's because Tito's handmade vodka didn't ever change their bottle to rainbow, but they made significant contributions to the LGBTQ rights movement in our nation, something that Absolute had not done early on. They had just rainbow washed. And so authenticity will always win out. And those two companies are a perfect example of that. There's been a lot of progress since then, but this is like 10 years ago. Tito's said, we're absolutely going to stand with the LGBTQ community. They made sizable donations, unlike ever before, to LGBTQ groups across the country. And now, at least in this region, I can't speak for other states, you walk into a gay bar and it's a Tito's and club, not an Absolute club. It's because of that authentic action behind it, rather than just changing your bottle to rainbow stripes.
Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. I had no idea. I know that Tito's is incredibly popular around here, mostly because it's gluten-free. But yeah, that's absolutely wonderful. Okay, so let's get to some of the questions that were asked in the chat, since we only have about 15 minutes left. Craig had asked about if any of your work, if you have any kind of focus within your organization on drug abuse and how that problem affects the LGBTQ community as well as the homeless youth.
So we work in partnership with a lot of community organizations that focus a lot on harm reduction, and we support them at the legislative level wherever we can, in ensuring that those voices are represented at the state level. This could vary from state to state, so I'm not sure what state you live in, Craig, but what I will tell you is that the work that we are doing that is centered around adverse childhood experiences directly correlates with substance abuse. And so we're really trying to tackle the issue from a community youth-focused level to prevent it from happening further down the road. We know that there are a variety of drugs that are used at some of the highest rates in the LGBTQ community. That's often to cope with the trauma that happens at an earlier age. I think that every LGBTQ organization should be centered around harm reduction and ensuring that there are proper resources being allocated to that work. We have seen far too many lives lost and destroyed in this community to drug abuse. And part of equality is the lived equality element, where it's great that we have marriage equality, it's great that there are health benefits, but if folks are still dealing with those challenges in their life, then they're never going to get to experience that equality. And so it's important that we continue to center those stories and work to address those as we move forward as a community.
I think that's a really great flag, to kind of note that the substance abuse doesn't, generally speaking, come out of nowhere. The early childhood traumas that these people experience are just as important a part of the discussion as the substance abuse or mental health needs that follow. So yeah, I think it's a really good thing to call out. Kadja, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to touch basically everything Christian said, but I was going to touch on us relying on our community partners and making sure that the good work gets done. And it would be almost impossible to do the work without community partners. And that our action plan, which includes ACEs such as homelessness, drug abuse, were included in Governor Murphy's 2021 state action plan to address those issues. So the community partners help us in getting the work done, and then we go to on the state level and in the legislature to make sure the work actually gets done. So it's like it goes full circle. Community partners help us, and then we still go to the state level and advocate to make sure the work gets done.
And it's that follow-up that's the most important, right? Because you can have all the marches you want, you can sign all the petitions you want, people say, okay, fine, yes, we'll do this, but it's that follow-up of making sure that, the change actually happens, which we're so thankful that you do, because it is one of those things that's pretty difficult to be just one person trying to, kind of track all these things down and follow all the leads to the end. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, so you've talked about some of the more like holistic approaches that you take towards the LGBTQ community. How can we apply some of the same tactics that you all do in your work when it comes to the other employees in our organizations? Because I know it can feel like there's not really anything an employee can do. You need that top-down, involvement and discussion about these situations. But let's say your company maybe doesn't have that kind of leadership involved, and at least at the moment. Are there any things that employees can do among themselves to really keep this progress going? Christian, it's up to you, it looks like.
Okay.
Go for it.
I think it's good for employees to in the military, we call it command climate surveys. So it's an opportunity for the organization as a whole to provide constructive criticism, and it also provides the leadership to provide feedback, and then sometimes they meet in the middle and they make it work. But at Garden State Equality, we really honor our employees. So during the height of the political uprisings and right around the Derek Chauvin's trial, Garden State Equality actually licensed out a therapist. We really focus on our employees and their mental health, and it was free of charge. So if they were feeling like it was too much, it was too much. Okay, well, an email went out to the staff. Hey, and in lieu of what's going on, this is a service we provide for you. And if you need some downtime, we also allow that downtime. We believe in self-care. And so, yeah, I think that's
wonderful.
Yeah.
Because that is incredibly true. The idea of kind of the finances being the barrier for a lot of people to seek out those services that they really need is, it's a travesty, but it's a very real situation right now. And, kind of as it has been, as we start kind of breaking down the stigma around mental health or needing therapy or trying to get those services for yourself, it's the finances are still a very huge huge tripping point for a lot of people. So I think that's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, and by creating a healthy work environment, your employees are going to stay healthy. You have better work performance, and there's more energy in the office. The whole vibe of the organization, the organizational culture will change for the better.
No, absolutely. And actually, it's kind of interesting. Christian, we'll get to you in just a second. I wanted to highlight something you had talked about. So you had, like we said, you had a 6-year stint in the Army. And as someone who is married to a veteran, I can completely second the idea that the idea of chain of command or some of the basic processes of how decisions are made definitely is something that works its way into your personal life as well. So has that been more of a benefit to you, like something that you have helped bring to the organization? Or would you say that kind of training is something that, helps in small ways, but maybe you've had to change a lot in others?
For me personally, I think it's been a benefit. Christian can speak to this as well. Christian's a military spouse, so Christian can probably speak to this as well. But it's a benefit to me. I think it's a benefit.
Yeah, so from a military spouse perspective, I certainly think that there is some regimens that come from the military that make really great employees. So, I know that hiring veterans is a priority for many companies, and you certainly should not be worried about hiring someone that has served in the military. There's going to be a lot of benefits that come from that. It's great to know that I'm in such good company with military veterans and spouses. The one thing I wanted to add about what you were saying, Meg, about the change coming from leadership and versus top down, is that for anyone watching, if you're not in a leadership position, now is the time to approach your company and ask for their support in this work. And I only say that as someone who does a lot of training and work in the diversity and inclusion space. A lot of companies are scrambling to figure out how they can support their employees and how they can create a culture that is accepting. And so if you are thinking about starting an employee resource group or a business development group that is catered to the LGBTQ community, I would imagine it would be well received by the company, at least if they are prioritizing diversity and inclusion work. You can go to the head of diversity and inclusion and ask them there, or you can go to the head of HR and ask them. Many companies have ERGs for people of color, for women, for veterans. And so if your company already has those established, I imagine it would be relatively easy to get an LGBTQ one established. If they don't have ERGs, then you can be a trailblazer and try to establish one on your as the first one. But this is incredibly helpful because you may not know of other LGBTQ people and allies in your company, but with the formal development of an employee resource group, there's going to be opportunities to send out a system-wide email, or at least for there to be a posting in the break room that this group is meeting. And then next thing you know, you, as someone who thought you were all alone at a company, you're now standing with 20, 40 other employees who have similar identities or support people like you. And so organizing on that level is very important. If you are feeling like you can have the support to start this group, but there are a lot of things you want to change at the company, it will be much easier to make that change with a wide group of people versus just one individual. So you can work internally to make corporate change through one of these employee resources groups. And again, I'm not suggesting that anyone comes out in their workplace where they don't feel comfortable. But a lot of times what we hear is someone will come out and try to form one of these groups, and it is well received. And in the instances where it's not, those individuals find out that it wasn't really a company that they wanted to work at anyway, because they couldn't be their true selves. So only you will know what is right for you. But more times than not, we've seen it be approved and for that change to be accepted. And then again, when it's not accepted, we've seen those employees find jobs somewhere else where they're more valued.
Yeah, it absolutely speaks volumes about the organization itself. And, this is something we talk about a lot on some of our more job seeking focused chats, where we talk about, asking the question of the HR person, whoever you're talking to about the company, ask what kind of support they give currently. And if not only is it important to ask these questions, but it's important to listen to the answers and the tone of the answers. Are they excited that you're bringing up an area that they're just now exploring? Are they excited to partner with you on something that they don't really have a lot of knowledge in currently? Or are they giving you the pat, like, oh yeah, we definitely support all our employees? Because you're right, Christian, it's like you've said previously, this is a very, it's not always a visual diversity segment, right? And it's one of the things that Power to Fly, and obviously y'all work towards as well, is kind of understanding that not all intersectionalities are visible, not all, not all minority groups or underrepresented demographics. It's not always a visual element. You can't just say like, oh yeah, I can spot all of the LGBTQ members in our organization. It's not a thing. And so yeah, you're right, that visibility, as long as you feel safe doing it, is absolutely so important. All right, so we only have about 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about Garden State Equality a little bit more, and how people can kind of get in touch with you or follow your work or help support. So Christian, would you like to start, and then Kadja, we can go to you next?
Great. So for folks who are looking to learn more about Garden State Equality, they can visit gardenstateequality.org or follow us on social media. Garden State Equality is usually how we're written out on most of the social media sites. For those of you who are looking for examples of how to support nonprofits, you can go to teach.lgbt to see our LGBTQ inclusive curriculum website. This project was in large part funded by corporate support. So you can get a sense right there of how much change is possible through supporting community work like our curriculum work here in New Jersey. The curriculum work is in particular important for this conversation because what we've developed here in New Jersey is being used in other states across the country. And so by supporting your local organization, they too can do work that is then used across the country. And so by visiting that website, you'll see there our inclusive curriculum work that was funded in large part thanks to PSE and G. Another way that companies can be helpful to local community groups is through sponsoring the annual dinners, walks, 5Ks, as I mentioned earlier. We currently have equalitywalk.us up as a website, and on that website you'll see our corporate sponsors listed at the bottom, listed along with all of our community members that are helping to raise funds. And so, corporations do have that role to play in fundraising and being a part of the community. It will show members of the community who they should be supporting because they'll see who supports them. That is much more valuable than just changing your Facebook icon to a rainbow logo, is for them to see you out and supporting the important work of organizations like Garden State Equality.
No, I think that's absolutely great. And to your point about, kind of reaching out to companies to try and, put their money, where it is needed in those communities, that's definitely something that you can do it as an employee. You can ask either through human resources or whatever your particular chain of command might be, what kind of groups your company reaches out to. What does the philanthropy look like through your organization? Are there any core causes that are dear to them, or is there maybe a gap there that could be filled with a donation to something like this in your local area? It's much less of a lift on you than starting an ERG from scratch, but it's just a basic question you can ask. Kadja, let's go to you next.
You could, on all social media platforms, just Kadja Manuel, KDJAMANUEL. Yeah, there was something that I wanted to touch on today, but my brain is like, for healthcare providers and hospitals, for them to also reach out to local organizations. Perhaps they can form an LGBTQ clinic, maybe the first in its area. That's really popular. We have partnerships with healthcare providers and hospitals as well. We know that LGBTQ people are less likely to receive care if they know they're not in a safe space or aren't going to be gender affirmed. So before we exited today, I thought that was really important.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that up. There's so many concerns that the community faces that probably just don't even occur to a lot of people. And when you add in the incredibly and horribly stigmatized factor of homelessness, there's so many people in our country in general that are dealing with homelessness or displacement. And it's something that most people don't like to think about, do they? They don't like to, make eye contact with somebody that's panhandling on the corner. They don't like to think about or volunteer at homeless shelters. But you have taken already very very endangered group, like young children, people who don't have a place to live, they don't have, a safety net. And then you add in the incredibly, disruptive factor of not knowing where you're going to sleep at night. And all of a sudden you have problems that were big enough to begin with, but then they completely spiral. And one sort of begets the next. So thank you so much for highlighting, the problems, like some of the more specific problems that are faced. All right, in the last couple seconds we have, I just want to say a huge thank you to you both. It was absolutely wonderful to get to have this conversation with you. I learned a ton, and hopefully our audience did as well. Is there anything either of you would like to say before we jump?
Just
thank you and your husband for your service to our country, and thanks for leading a great conversation today.
You're welcome. And I know I can definitely tell you his response would be, thank you for paying my bar tab for 5 years. So, thank you so much for that. Kadja, anything from you?
same thing. Thank you for having us, and thank you and your husband for your service.
It's just been a pleasure to talk with you both. Huge round of applause for both of you. Ooh, hold on. There it goes.